Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Serbian Radio Chicago exclusive, and it is my great privilege to introduce our guest to you today, Mr. David Vuich, a renowned Serbian engineer who was part of the Apollo 7 NASA team who helped put the man on the moon, as we say. Mr. David Vuich, thank you for being here with us and welcome to Serbian Radio Chicago.
It's my great pleasure to join you, Olga. I thank you so much for inviting me.
So before we dive in, tell us a little bit about your Serbian roots. You are very, very connected to your Serbian roots.
Well, my parents immigrated to the United States prior to the First World War. And of course, I grew up in a small community of Midland, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 some odd miles north and west of Pittsburgh. Most of the Serbs in my hometown who came before and after the First World War basically came from the same region as my dad. Many of them my father came from Okučana. He was a former officer in the Serbian military who fought in the Balkan Wars. My mother was of the Todorović family from Lika, from the village of Glina. My parents, again, like a number of other Serbs and Eastern European immigrants that found solace and employment in the steel community of Midland, Pennsylvania. I was born and raised amongst those who experienced both the Balkan and the First World War. So as you can well imagine, I learned a lot from not only my father, but also many of my relatives and our neighbors. Most of those folks came from Lika, Kordun, Banja, Slavonia. We spoke family in our home, we spoke Serbian in our home with friends and relatives, as well as close neighbors who also came from the same region of my father. I recall my father spent many hours telling me and making certain that I was aware of my Serbian heritage, about Serbia's heroes, customs, traditions, its folklore and its faith. And we prepared for all of our Orthodox Christian holidays to include for our Slavas, which is Krstoldan, which takes place in September. We also prepare for Christmas with the ever popular pečenica and all of the other wonderful delicacies made by my mother and all my aunts and many of our neighbors. And of course, Easter, we look forward to Jagnjetana and enjoying the festivities of the birth of Jesus Christ in our little Serbian Orthodox community.
Wonderful. So when was the first time you went to Serbia?
Well, I went to Serbia the first time was right after the Apollo, the last Apollo mission, where and that was the mission to the moon, where we were all allowed, all my colleagues and I were granted an extended leave and a break after the intense schedule commitments required by the Apollo program. I traveled with a dear friend of mine who was a college professor of music at the University of Southern California. He was also a jazz trumpet player, and he agreed to the visit to Yugoslavia, where we both had an opportunity to visit with our relatives for the very first time. My relatives in Belgrade and Okučana in Slavonia, and my colleagues' relatives in Ljubljana. We were both jazz musicians and classical musicians, and we look forward to visiting not only our family but also becoming familiar with the music in again Yugoslavia. We spent several days enjoying the sights of Belgrade. We rented a car. We drove to Okučani to visit with my relatives. And of course, that was the first time that I had the opportunity and pleasure to be with a Vuich family. I've never met any of my family in Serbia or Yugoslavia up until that time. And that was, as you can well imagine, a very emotional visit, but it was one that was overwhelmingly heartfelt. We spent a couple of days with the family. Then my colleague and I continued down the Adriatic coast, beginning the ancient city of Pula. We went to the Roman Colosseum, city of Split, and the mausoleum of Augustus Caesar, and then we went down to Dubrovnik and Kotor and back to Belgrade. And when we came back to Belgrade, we wanted to at least visit with some of the Serbian jazz musicians, and especially Vojislav Simic, who had the big jazz orchestra at Radio Televiziju Belgrade. And we went to the television station, and lo and behold, I found a friend of mine that I haven't seen many years, the name of Duško Gojković, who recognized me. I knew him and when he was playing with a large jazz orchestra in the United States, and he invited me and my colleague in to perform with his jazz group at the Radio Television Belgrade. And rest assured, it was a pleasure and a joy. And of course, after our initial performance with Duško's organization, he asked us to join him on his tour throughout Yugoslavia, where we played a jazz concert at the Colosseum in Pula with a young lady, vocalist by the name of Gabe Novak. And then we went on to play the jazz festival in Dubrovnik. But during that whole period, it was an outstanding experience for both my colleague Don Erjavik and myself. And of course, he pronounces his name in Slovenian, Erjavac. But it was overwhelming. We enjoyed meeting new friends in Belgrade, and we also had a great pleasure of meeting many both jazz and classical musicians while in Yugoslavia, and as well as in Dubrovnik and in Pula and what have you. Again, I had the great pleasure of meeting new people. I spoke Serbian well enough to at least allow me to converse with these folks. The trip to Okučani to visit my family included my father's only sister, my teta Natalia, who was an absolutely gorgeous woman with deep, penetrating blue eyes, identical to that of my late father. Rest assured, there were, as I mentioned, many tears. And of course, while I was there, they had a concern for my having visited for the very first time as to whether or not I spoke the language. And they were overwhelmed by the fact that I did. And then they asked if I have been a member of our Serbian Orthodox Church. I said, yeah, and yes, I did, and was, and more importantly, that we celebrated our Slava on Krstov Dan, and they all got up and just said, Hvala Bogu.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Sounds like a very emotional trip for you.
It was indeed. and it was, then we went to visit other relatives in Stara Gradišća. As you can imagine, we lost a number of those during the Second World War, Stara Gradišća and Okučana being very close to Jasenovac.
Sure.
And furthermore, we went to Sisak to visit other members of the family, and of course Banja Luka. These were where we had a few moments to venture outside of Okučana to meet other members of the Vuich family, and it was a tremendous experience. Many of those obviously are no longer in those villages as a result of what has occurred recently. Many of them are living in Germany, either in France or in Canada or in Australia. But I was fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to meet them during my first visit to Yugoslavia and Serbia back in the late 60s. And of course, I have since visited on numerous occasions.
Wonderful. So let's get back to NASA. You are the only surviving member of the Serbian Apollo team. How did you get involved with NASA, and what was that pathway like? Because it was one of the most incredible things that humanity accomplished, putting the man on the moon.
Yes, upon my leaving U.S. Air Force, where I spent a number of years, I had a dear friend of mine invite me to California to consider employment with a company known as North American Aviation. They had what is commonly referred to as a corporate management mentor protege program, and he felt that I qualified for that project to boost me into management. So I went there, and I was hired by a division of Autonetics, or of North American Aviation, that is known as Autonetics, which was their electronics division. And we were designing many of the flight control systems and the guidance systems for submarines and aircraft at that division, to include radar and sonar and what have you. At one point in time, I was being moved from manufacturing to methods engineering to contracts and pricing to government affairs, whatever have you. And then the company had just been awarded the Apollo program. That was in our division, was called the Space and Information Systems Division. I was looking to hire people from our various divisions as quickly as possible. And I was selected as one of those. Interestingly enough, just a hallway away from me was another gentleman who walked into my office one day, and he saw a name on my door, and he says, "Are you Mr. Vuich?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "My name is Sam Vuich." And it just so happens that both Sam and I, whose name is Slavoljub, we were both invited to the space exploration program in our Space and Information Systems Division. It was quite an experience. I myself wanted to emphasize the significance of the concept, the contributions of what we made, but more importantly, as we became, both Sam and I became involved in the program, we immediately recognized that there were a number of other Serbs that were working at the highest levels of the program. And I was fortunate enough to have had an opportunity to meet with Milojko Vucelic, who was the systems design director, and also responsible for the Apollo space launch team, equivalent to that of NASA. We were all North American Aviation. I again enjoyed, if you were working with our colleagues. Many of them were heavily involved in the design and development of very sophisticated systems and methodology that were of significance to the successful launch and landing of the Apollo 11 on the moon. So it was incredible. But rest assured, I also make reference to the fact that we made responsible decisions that reduced the risk to the astronauts, whose lives were always hanging in the balance. But understand too that if you follow the Apollo program at all, we lost 3 astronauts in Apollo 1 because of a space, the escape hatch was not designed by the NASA people in perspective. Just so happens one of our designers, Danilo Vuich, redesigned the emergency space hatch on the command module or the Apollo moon spacecraft, which such unfortunate occurrence never did occur again. Secondly, Apollo 13, as you well are aware, was another experience in which we almost lost 3 astronauts that were returning, if you will, into Earth's orbit. And the gentleman responsible for having communicated with the astronauts, making them aware what alternatives options they had under the most critical circumstances, again, was Miliko Vucelic. Miliko Vucelic was primarily instrumental in providing them with the necessary instructions to bring them back to the Earth safely. Miliko later was awarded the Legion of Merit by President Nixon for this heroic, if you will, event. All of those of us Serbs that were on the Apollo space launch team, we were all awarded NASA Achievement Awards because we worked in a very high profile area within the organization that allowed us maximum exposure to the space launch efforts. I worked in the area of program and project management, where my particular area of responsibility was between NASA, the astronauts, the subcontractor and supplier, to determine exactly what critical components, critical subsystems or systems were designed, developed and tested to the extent where they would become fully operational while in orbit. That was one of my responsibilities. But more importantly, working in that environment was incredible. The Serbo 7 group, we became very close. We had several of them that were actually from Yugoslavia, and several from the United States, places like Wyoming and Iowa, where Serbs have settled many years prior to the First and the Second World War. I'm very honored to have been associated and directly involved in one of the most pioneering accomplishments in the history of humankind. He said, my recent visit to Belgrade was wrought with nostalgia as I made, a number of presentations on the Apollo moon landing and to many audiences throughout the city. I spoke about the evolution of the development of the Apollo program, basically starting from virtually nothing and emphasize the recognition of the importance of my departed colleagues, the Serbo 7 Apollo launch team. My objective was to inspire my Serbian audiences, but I also wanted to convey to them that the American Serbs have not forgotten who we are and where we came from. I think I can confidently state that they joined me in expressing mutual pride in our accomplishments, beginning with the likes of Nikola Tesla and Mihailo Pupin, and through the very work of the Apollo program. So the Apollo program was something that was an incredible challenge for all of us. We worked sometime 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. The program began in 1962, and amazingly enough, as I mentioned earlier, we had virtually nothing or very little to work with. We did have certain technologies that were the result of the former German scientist Werner von Braun. He brought a lot of the propulsion systems technology with him, but also Werner von Braun was a visionary. He also recognized the value of sending a man to the moon or orbital and space exploration flight. So he was very instrumental in having been actively and directly involved in the success of our space exploration programs. So we began in '62, and amazingly enough, we placed astronauts on the moon in 1969. That's an incredible feat, if you will. The reason for the having expedited the design and development of the program in 1958 and 1959, the Soviets had launched the Sputnik program. We were overwhelmed by the fact that they were so far ahead of us in the space exploration and huge rocket engine technology. So it wasn't until we finally received word that then President Kennedy awarded the contract for the Apollo program that we became not only intently, but more importantly, committed and dedicated to seeing this vast project materialize and succeed.
Wonderful. Just to switch gears a little bit, you've mentioned the likes of Nikola Tesla and Mihailo Pupin and all of you having participated in such an incredible effort, having the Serb Apollo 7 team participate in something that humankind has never even been able to replicate, it seems. Having Serbian flag fly over the White House, having so many different things that Serbian Americans have contributed to the fabric of the United States, but somehow in political terms, we haven't had that much impact and influence. After your involvement with NASA, you've spent many years on Capitol Hill, and you were one of those rare Serbs who had access and influence. Tell us about that and talk about a little bit, if you will, why, based on all those accomplishments and being a part of the American fabric since the 1800s, we haven't been so politically successful, if you will.
Well, let me start with what you made reference to, and specifically regarding Nikola Tesla and Mihailo Pupin. Amazingly enough, very little up until recently has been known with respect to those gentlemen and their significant contributions to all of that which we are currently enjoying in this country, because very few people know what people like Tesla and Pupin have contributed. Rest assured, we look back at the obvious fact that the Serbs had been contributors to a successful industrial revolution at critical periods in both countries, both Serbia as well. But Tesla contributed disproportionately to preparing the United States for the 21st century by effectively introducing state-of-the-art electrical and electronic technologies that modernized the urbanization and scientific progress of the United States. Tesla was a decisive, sort of disruptive innovator who was instrumental in placing the U.S. into scientific, economic, and social efficiency, resulting in its emergence as the world's most powerful economy. Its many significant contributions were multifold that of its many peers. Again, Tesla represented a tremendous benefit to the United States, as did Dr. Mihailo Pupin, best known for numerous patents, including the extended long-range distant telephone communication, and he successfully pioneered the in-depth research pertaining to wave detection and current analysis. He organized the research group for the submarine detection systems known as sonar today. Unbeknownst to many people in this country today, including Serbs as well as Americans, Dr. Pupin was the founder and a member of numerous technical organizations and was selected president or vice president of the highest U.S. scientific and technical institutions, such as the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, of which today, this very day, a member of the board of directors is a Serb, whose name is Vuich. Amazingly enough, he was also a member of the New York Academy of Science and was awarded a Pulitzer Prize. Interestingly enough, we talked about the Apollo program just a few moments ago. Dr. Pupin was also an outstanding visionary. He was the founding member of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics back in 1915, which is currently known as the National Aviation and Space Administration, or NASA. So if you look at it in terms of what Pupin had actually contributed to space and exploration, he was the founder of NASA, and very few people are aware of that. So he was also very much involved as a visionary in his interest in space exploration, which included electromagnetic theory of solar phenomena. So looking at it in terms of what Pupin and Tesla have contributed has actually received virtually little or no attention in the United States up until recently, and especially for Tesla. But during several meetings that I had a number of years ago, I was asked the question, what is the biggest problem that we as Serbs are dealing with as it pertains to our relationship with the United States? And I had to be very blunt and suggest one of the unfortunate circumstances is that we have lost our identity. These people have no idea who we are. They have no idea that Serbs are very highly educated. They are very God-fearing Serbian Orthodox Christians. They have contributed so much throughout the world in numerous, if you will, communities, countries, whatever have you. But unfortunately, we haven't made that information available to anyone. We haven't honored these people that have made a significant impact towards a specific technology or community or a government, whatever the case may be. I suggested it was time that we at least recognize that void and pursue objectives that would at least, if you will, portray the Serbian community as a community who is very proud of their heritage, customs, traditions, folklore, and their faith, and the fact that they have contributed so much to the general welfare of so many communities historically. I've worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. I was a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee for a number of years, worked on the House side. And after I had left Capitol Hill, I was a government affairs executive and lobbyist for a number of aerospace and aviation companies in Washington. During that period, I also found it necessary to at least pursue several other peripheral concerns that I had about our people. And this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and 90s, where I recognized that the Serbs had virtually little or no voice in the political process on Capitol Hill. I found that when there were specific areas of concerns or issues, and where Serbs were immediately being demonized by the opposition, we had very little in the way of an organization structure to pursue those unfortunate words of slander and disinformation in perspective. I found it necessary with several of my Serbian colleagues to organize a group called the Serbian-American Voters Alliance back in the 80s. And unfortunately, did not receive the response that we had assumed would have materialized. In the meantime, our opposition was very successful in organizing and becoming very active in the political process. They had established a very distinct presence in the nation's capital. They've raised millions of dollars on behalf of their issues and concerns. They had access 24/7 to the political process, both the House and the Senate side. They work the political process daily because the U.S. Congress does not sleep, nor does the opposition. Unfortunately, we had a few organizations that have made a dire attempt to challenge offensive legislation and to challenge the opposition. However, with not very much in the way of success, because we weren't united in perspective to pursue larger organizations that were well established. Unfortunately, we've lost an awful lot of very precious time. We've lost our identity here, even though we have access to a number of members of Congress, and to include the Senate, who were very much in support of Serbian issues. But there are only a handful of us here in Washington that were available to at least provide them documented evidence of how our people were being demonized and how we were being treated, and the disinformation that was being circulated and distributed throughout Capitol Hill. It's most unfortunate. But I look at in terms of hopefully lessons learned. We have lost a lot, and unfortunately, during the last crisis of the 90s, we had no one to speak on our behalf that had a voice strong enough to overcome the unfortunate opposition.
Sure.
And to this very day, we find that the opposition continues to challenge us, and the folks in Congress, many of them do not recognize Serbia or the Serbian people as a threat, because we have no presence.
Exactly.
So it's time to recognize the importance not only of a presence, but also an organization that is designed specifically not only to challenge the opposition, but also to include all of the necessary professionals that recognize the manner in which to pursue the political process.
Understood.
This isn't something that you do over a weekend. This is something that is done 24/7. From my personal experience and having hosted visits of numerous Serbian organizations and individuals, both from Yugoslavia and Serbia, and of course here from the States, they recognize that we have a problem. They come to town here in Washington, and they're terribly unprepared. And once they leave this town, they never come back. And the fact remains is, unless you've established a definite and a very well-organized and professional group of individuals here in Washington, will continue to deal with these unfortunate circumstances in the future.
Sure.
So there are a number of issues that are currently, being bandied about with respect to what is currently taking place in Serbia and in Republic of Srpska and in Crna Gora. But the fact remains is, here is an opportune time to see a SAVA organization orchestrated and organized in perspective that has a well-documented agenda as to how to pursue and support these issues in political perspective. One of the areas that need be considered is the area of hopefully overcoming the identity crisis, and that is a very professional public relations, media relations and communications organization that at least would provide the message of who the Serbs are and the fact that they have suffered the consequences of over 500 and some years under the Ottomans, and then lost a numerous amount of their population during the First World War, and then suffer the consequences of an ideology that was not characteristic of the Serbian people after the Second World War. I think it has had a terrible impact on the Serbian psyche, and we need to seriously consider how we are going to rectify that by organizing in perspective, by seeking out all of the intellects within our community who recognize the value added of who we are as a people, and to organize in those professionals in all aspects who would lend us their intellect to pursue a common and mutual objective. We are in dire need of not only intellectual and professional support, but also in financial support, where hopefully SAVA would recognize the value of organizing different types of events, be they dinners, receptions, be they one of the programs of which I introduced many years ago was the American Serbian Achievement Award banquets to honor our American Serbs who have received very little in the way of recognition, even from within our own community. So there are many opportunities in which we as American Serbs should recognize as being available to us to raise the necessary resources to support such a, say, Serbian-American Voters Alliance political action committee, whereby the political action committee is available on a 24/7 basis to pursue not only offensive legislation, but to challenge the opposition and more importantly, provide support to those members or to those political leaders who are seeking political office in Washington or in the state of Pennsylvania or in the local community. All of those folks who recognize that who we are as Serbs and our contributions, I think need to be considered for support from our community. I think the other thing that we have been terribly remiss about is we every year we hold an awful lot of events, be they slavas, be it church events, be it choir concerts, be it whatever the case may be. Now might be an opportune time to to invite our members of Congress, our local mayor, representative, governor to these events so they become more familiar who we are, so we can erase that unfortunate moniker of being considered barbarians, as so, if you will, portrayed by our opposition. I think a Serbian-American Voters Alliance should look at all those specific areas as a very crucial and critical agenda, and how can we go about in the best possible manner to see these things, these unfortunate circumstances rectified, bringing together teams of individuals working together to pursue a common objective. So I have worked the Congress. I've worked it on the Hill. I worked it off the Hill as a lobbyist and a government affairs executive. My wife has worked for over 30 some years in the political process, both the House and the Senate. So looking at it in terms of the importance of becoming more familiar, it may be cause for a education made available to certain Serbian communities with respect to the importance of the political process, and hopefully make them aware of the importance of getting actively involved. So all of what Sava in the future represents should include all of those elements to see to it that our identity has been restored. We play a more active role in the political process. We support those individuals, elected representatives, who have supported our issues and concerns. So these are just a few areas that need to be addressed and need to be emphasized.
Wonderful advice. I wholeheartedly agree with you. In the last election, it was the first time that the Serbian-American community was recognized by presidential campaign. And that was one important step towards all these objectives that you have shared with us. Thank you for being on our radio show today. And hopefully we will have many, many more of these discussions where our Serbian-American community will understand its importance and its place within the American political landscape. Thank you again so much for being with us today.
Olga, it's been a great pleasure to join you. And rest assured, I want to extend my sincerest best of good health and best wishes for success for the Sava organization. Please convey my sincere love and best regards to all of my dear friends in the Chicago area. And rest assured, look forward to seeing you in the very near future. And again, best regards and best wishes to your family.
Thank you.